off in a book. Our introduction actually will be in the book. It's page 149, paragraphs 1 and 2. Today is the pursuit, it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I want to go ahead and let Truman introduce this topic. I think he does a great job. Tim, could I ask you to read that for us?
How far would you like to go?
That whole page, 2 paragraphs. It begins, the United States Declaration of Independence declares.
The United States Declaration of Independence declares that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are inalienable human rights. While the document is distinctively American in times and has changed since Jefferson first put quill to paper, it is surely the case that these three things capture in a beautifully concise form the dominant Western approach to what it means to be human. We prize life. We consider personal freedom of central importance. And who does not want to be happy? Yet the rise of expressive individualism, of the normative modern self described in this book, means that all three categories have changed somewhat in terms of their actual content or definition. Indeed, given the assumption that these are distinctly human concerns, it makes perfect sense that as the nature of what it means to be human has changed, so this has had significant implications for how life, freedom, and happiness are to be understood.
Thank you. Let's flip in our Bibles to 1 Peter. Book of 1 Peter. And we'll be reading in chapter 2. Truman says something in his intro that I think is good for us to remember. The idea of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is not new. It's a very good encapsulation of what we would call in a secular realm westernized thought, and that would trace back to Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, and their discussions. We'll briefly cover that. But then that flowed through into the Roman Empire, and then that flowed through on into the colonial era with all of the great nations, Portugal, England, France, Spain as they colonized the world, largely the big church. And then that has since flown through even into the 1700s, which would be Jefferson, all of those folks raised in kind of a classical model with that old philosophical thought. And we'll get to that in a minute. But what I want to show us is from the scriptures themselves that the essence of liberty and the pursuit of happiness, liberty meaning freedom, and then the pursuit of happiness, not happiness as in ha-ha, but happiness as in purpose, meaning, and flourishing. The blesseds. Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, stand in the path of sinners, sit in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. And then the image is the essence of this fulfillment. He will be like a tree firmly planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither, and in whatever he does, he prospers. So that's an image of stability, solidness. It's an image of fruitfulness at the right time in the right place. Constant nourishing being placed by that stream, and then having a certain function within the landscape. Trees provide nourishment, fruit. Trees provide shade and protection. Trees provide all kinds of things within a landscape. So that image even there goes all the way back 1,000 years before, say, Aristotle and Socrates were exploring in the 300s and 400s BCs. It might have been 500, 600, 700 years even before that. So the concept of man and happiness and fruitfulness has been all-consuming. Now what God tells us is, your happiness and your fulfillment is in me. That's what he said in the Garden of Eden. And then we said, no, my happiness and fulfillment is in me being you, me being God, and me having the freedom to do whatever I want to do, which is not the freedom that God ever wanted us to have. Now, what we've got in the Scriptures is a clear distinction. You are either serving God himself or you are serving Satan and his devices. But you are under a master and you are serving one or the other. There is no, I'm on my own, I'm free and independent, doing my own thing. And even Satan, believe it or not, and I won't prove this here, but even Satan is serving God in his purposes. Not that God endorses sin, he does not cause sin, God is not evil, but somehow this all fits in this amazing tapestry that God is weaving from the beginning of time to the end of time. We sit here in our little snapshot of aliveness here on this earth, but when it all finishes, and it will, we're going to look and we're going to see what God has done. And there is nothing outside of his purpose. And there is nothing that has no meaning. So back to the idea then of the concept of liberty. Now in the U.S., we talk a lot about liberty, but we are a very new country, all things being equal. We're about 225 years, plus or minus 230, however you count it. Declaration of Independence forward, a little bit before, whatever. But we're new. But we codified this westernized thought. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, the pursuit of happiness was always meant to be meaning, but we left that open. We left that open for different historical reasons. But from a Christian standpoint, I want us to see what liberty is all about. Does anyone have a King James Bible?
New King James.
That might work. What is, read 2:16 to me. That works. Perfect. Okay, so you're going to, you got to stand up. All right, now, context of this book. This is written to about 6 churches all throughout what we would call modern-day Turkey. But each city independently ruled, has a little tiny king or whatever. And even tribes could have kings or whatever. But it's all still part of the Roman Empire, right? So we've got this message, this letter being sent to these churches. Now, these churches are in desperate straits. It says you're undergoing various trials. You're doing all these, it's tough. It's tough. So it's meant to help them understand how to suffer well. How to suffer well. What he's giving us here in this chapter is there's a recognition that you may be a slave, maybe you aren't. Maybe you're doing this, maybe you're doing that. But there's all these different stations in life. But you're in a non-Christian environment, hostile to the faith, hostile to Jesus Christ. You're having to live your life and be a blessing to others in any way you can. It happens to dovetail with this message. But let's go ahead and start, Ken, if you would, at 2. So much good stuff. 2:11, and then just keep going, and I'll pause in between.
Beloved, I beg you, as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts, which war against the soul.
So pause there. Strangers and pilgrims, meaning this is your citizenship. This is your true life. Right now you're down here living the smaller life as part of this larger life. So remember who you are and your purpose. Go ahead.
Having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation. Therefore, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether to the king as supreme, or to governors as those who are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men.
Pause there. Submitting to every governmental structure that you can. Now, if they order you to do something against the law of God, you can't. But everything else, if you can, do. Go ahead.
As free, yet not using liberty as a cloak for vice, but as bondservants of God.
Slaves of God. So this is an interesting piece. He's saying, as slaves of God, use your liberty, your freedom, for me. Your liberty, purchased with my blood, through the blood of the Son that I sent to die for you. Use that liberty, that freedom, to serve me. So again, it's not freedom in and of itself for us. It's freedom to do His purposes, His will, according to His timing, in the context that He places you, both historical, economic, physiological, in every way that God gives you. Every circumstance that you're enduring, whether righteous circumstance or unrighteous circumstance, whether just or unjust. Some of these people were slaves, some were in jail, some had had all of their goods ripped away. But use the liberty that I give you, and some of them were slaves. They didn't have any liberty. Some of them did have some liberty. But whatever form of liberty, whatever level of liberty you have, use it for me. Keep going.
Honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king.
Honor the king. Keep going.
Servants, be submissive to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the harsh. For this is commendable, if because of conscience toward God one endures grief, suffering wrongfully. For what credit is it if when you are beaten for your faults, you take it patiently? But when you do good and suffer, if you take it patiently, this is commendable before God.
So pause there. Notice the unjust circumstance. And he draws that out on purpose as a real injustice. And then he says you have liberty, basically you have the freedom to behave well under that circumstance or not. And he says use your liberty, how you react, to obey me and to glorify me. And then the ultimate example. Go ahead.
For to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps, who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth, who when he was reviled did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously, who himself bore our sins in his own body on the tree, that we, having died to sins, might live for righteousness. By those stripes you were healed.
Thank you. That's perfect.
Sheep
Oh, sorry.
going astray. But now I return to the shepherd and the overseer of your souls.
Thank you, sir. Perfect. And when you think about Christ in terms of liberty, who had more freedom than Jesus Christ? He had all the power. He could have called 10,000 angels. He was God himself, the Trinity, and then he took on flesh and laid aside the use of those godly attributes for that brief season for our purpose, for our sanctification, righteousness, salvation, all of those things. And if anyone suffered unjustly, it was Christ. If anyone could have snapped his fingers and changed the circumstance or blown away the people that were so unjust to him, it was Jesus Christ. And what he is saying is, as I suffered for you and used my freedom, because Jesus Christ had freedom, for you, use your freedom for me by suffering for others. And he says, in fact, in this verse, in 21, for this you were called. So when you think about westernized thought and the great philosophers or whatever you think, all of this back from whatever to now, the question hasn't necessarily been about, I need my freedom, I need my liberty, I got to have my liberty. If I just had liberty, then I'd be great. The question was, rather, how do I use my liberty for God? How do I use my liberty rightly for the good of others? That was always the question. That was, if you go back and you read through the pursuit of happiness, just that phrase, it's all about how do I use my freedom well? How do I use my freedom well? So when we're thinking through this, I wanted to give us a new lens, hopefully, because, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, we've all grown up listening to this and knowing that this is part of our culture and part of our country. But it's not about freedom, freedom, freedom. Freedom fixes everything. It's about the right use of your freedom. And what God says is if you use your freedom for me, you will find happiness. And that's the point of the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who mourn. That word blessed is, and I'm going to botch the Greek, but it's that word for fulfillment, for true purpose. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those who suffer unjustly. Just go on down the list. By the way, there's no real strong positives there. Blessed are the wealthy. Blessed are the handsome and tall and the whatevers. That's not there. What it is, it's around blessed are those that suffer as Christ suffered, because Christ is calling us to that same purpose and meaning. So keep that in mind as we move through this chapter around liberty. All right, let's go ahead and go to page 150 and 151, because now we're going to start to see what's happening all around us. Aiden, you've got your book, right? Could I get you to read 150? Just start at the top there under modern life. So what he's going to do is he's going to take us life, modern life, the new definition, modern liberty, and then happiness. Go ahead.
Expressive individualism has a profound impact on matters of life and death for several reasons. First, it tends to lead us to think about personhood as being something that requires a degree of self-consciousness. If the self is defined by how we think, feel, and desire, then we need to be at a stage of intellectual development where these things can take place in order to be a true person. And that shapes how we understand issues surrounding the beginning and ending of life. This is exemplified in the work of Peter Singer, the Princeton University ethicist. Singer is comfortable with acknowledging embryos as possessing life, but he denies that they are persons. For him, to be a person is to be self-conscious, and that means one must have the ability to express oneself, to conceptualize and to act intentionally towards the future, and to act deliberately in ways that further one's own happiness. These are things that embryos cannot do. Indeed, newborn babies and adults with advanced dementia, among other things, are also incapable of such things and therefore lack true personhood, and the rights typically enjoyed by people. This then leads to a second implication. The ethics of life and death in a world of expressive individualism tend to default to a form of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is the philosophy of life where the moral, defensible position is that which gives most happiness to most persons involved.
So pause there. So that's a lot of stuff. But it flows with everything we've been learning. And this flows with the larger conversations that we're seeing going on all around us. There was a whole movement of trans that was trying to enforce, to mandate all children be given puberty blockers until they reach a sufficient age so they could choose what gender they wanted to be. Because they didn't want the chemicals interfering with them having choice. So you see, you've moved this idea of life from being God-given. Remember, this is all coming out of the Enlightenment thing. God is out of the equation. Now it's the utility of that person. The utility of that person was assumed back maybe 100 years ago. At least that person could be a worker, they could be a mom, they could be whatever that it was. But now that gender's on the table and they have to choose even that, then that person doesn't even become a person until that person can actually look you in the face and say, yeah, here's my choice, or here's what I want, or here's how I want to be. Which then moves the question around abortion and then euthanasia, or the idea of people with dementia, or if anybody that can't respond or can't be a quote-unquote person as we would define it, they no longer have a right to life, because the collective happiness is more important. So if that child becomes a burden on me and my happiness, then I have the right to choose whether that child lives or dies. Yes? You can go ahead and sit down for just a minute.
Utilitarianism.
Yeah.
That so in this concept, he was not a true person.
Right.
His last, whatever he used, because he didn't have a utility.
Yes. What Tim was saying is his dad was unable to make choices, was unable to be functional, and so when he got to that point, he was no longer a person. And then in that question, in this context, because God's out of the picture, because that circumstance was outside of an eternal plan or something bigger than ourselves, there is no eternal plan, there is nothing bigger than ourselves except for our own happiness, the way that we define it, then this person can go. And that's where we end up. Okay, back to you. Pick up right where you left off in the middle of that paragraph. Therefore, if a child in the womb.
Therefore, if a child in the womb, or even a newborn baby, has Down syndrome or a birth defect, that is something that may well have an adverse effect upon the parent's happiness. It means that their lives will be considerably transformed by the presence of the child. They will have responsibilities that they would otherwise not have, and perhaps the joy of having a child will be highly qualified, if not negated, by the child's long-term radical dependency upon them. In this case, abortion or even euthanasia after birth can be justified because the net amount of happiness for the persons involved, only adults, not the newborn, will be greater if the child is killed. Not being a person, it has no personal rights.
Perfect. Thank you. So you see the math there. The math is about the collective happiness, as judged usually by my own personal happiness. But that's how that works. So when you don't have the perspective that God creates life and gives it to us as a gift, and then God takes life when it's His time, if you don't have that perspective, then you easily fall into this worldly perspective of, well, my happiness, they're not happy, clearly, because how could you be happy like that? So then, they have no right to life at that point. That's the modern concept of life. So let's go to the modern concept of liberty, which is to the bottom of 151. Nikki, could I put on you? You don't have a book? Could one magically appear for Nikki? Aiden's got you behind you there. 151. Just start right under modern liberty and then go on to the next page.
While the speed of sexual revolution has been shocking to many, perhaps the strangest and most disturbing developments over recent years have been the ways in which freedoms once considered to be self-evident goods of speech and of religion are now under pressure in many Western democracies. This is something both unexpected and sinister. So
pause there. And this is clear. We've been covering this the whole time. LGBTQ hit this hard in chapter 7. So Nikki, if you could go to 153, the paragraph here, it says, in fact, this position was already clear. So what we're going to show you here, remember how in chapter 7 we started to show how our understandings were creeping into the regulatory environment and even interpretations of law. And how that was how we were ending up with some of these quote-unquote rights and regulations and rules being written that were really starting to impinge on society as we know it. So now he's going to take this modern idea of liberty, freedom, not what we studied in the scriptures just a minute ago. He's going to take this modern idea and show how that started to creep in through our laws and through interpretations. Go ahead.
This legislation specifically excluded same-sex partnerships from the state-recognized definition of marriage. DOMA, however, came under challenge by a woman named Edith Windsor. In 2007, Windsor had married her same-sex partner, Thea Spire, in Canada. The couple lived in New York State, and when Spire died in 2009, Windsor tried to claim the federal estate tax exemption to which legally recognized spouses are entitled. This claim was denied under the terms of Section 3 of DOMA, which excluded same-sex partnerships, and Windsor sued. Her claim was upheld by both a district court and the Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit in 2012. Then, with the case pending for the Supreme Court, the Justice Department announced that it would not seek to defend DOMA.
You can pause there. Thank you. So what you see Defense of Marriage Act, 1990s. By the 2000s, things had shifted. Now, the Supreme Court has a constitutional function, and that's to interpret the laws that are passed, and do they meet the standards of the Constitution? Do they violate it? Are they consistent with it? The problem with the Supreme Court is it's people. And so they can reflect cultural norms and attitudes. We've seen that. That's the reason why the Supreme Court will end up reversing itself at different times, 100 years later or 50 years later, whatever. We just saw that with Roe v. Wade. So we had something in the 90s. We're into the 2000s. Now we're interpreting it differently. And this arose based on a tax issue. A tax issue. That's how this came in. But then where this went, far different. Far different. Adam, can I pick on you now?
Sure.
154. I'm going to make you start right in the middle. What was unsurprising, however, on 154.
Okay.
Perfect. And I'll stop you when I need to.
What was surprising, however, was the way in which the court's majority characterized the motive of the opponents of gay marriage that underlay DOMA. The relevant passage reads as follows. DOMA's unusual deviation from the usual tradition of recognizing and accepting state definitions of marriage here operates to deprive same-sex couples of the benefits and responsibilities that come with the federal recognition of their marriages. This is strong evidence of a law having the purpose and effect of disapproval of that class. The avowed purpose and practical effect of the law here in question are to impose a disadvantage, a separate status, and so a stigma upon all who enter into same-sex marriages made lawful by the unquestioned authority of the states. So
pause there, go to 155 and start reading it. It is worth reflecting on that for a moment. So this is Truman's analysis then of this paragraph. Because the paragraph of a justice of the Supreme Court says that this law, DOMA, had the purpose and effect of disapproving of a class of citizen and also stigmatizing them. Bigotry. That was the attitude. Just 10 years after DOMA was even signed into law by the president. So go ahead with Truman's analysis.
it is worth reflecting on that for a moment. Christians and Jews hold to a view of marriage that sees it as being between one man and one woman, and that for numerous reasons. The teaching of Genesis 2, the complementarity of men and women, and the procreative intention of marriage. Yet in Windsor, the Supreme Court dismisses 2,000 years of Christian thinking, and many more of Jewish thought, as nothing more than irrational bigotry. At best, the court presumably decided that even if religious objections to gay marriage had once had validity, they did so no longer, and the only reason for maintaining such was a smokescreen for justifying the marginalization of a certain sector of society. When the highest court in the land can codify such a view of religion in a judgment, the times and the cultural attitudes have truly changed.
Thank you. Perfect. So the Supreme Court of the United States interpreted it this way, and all of a sudden the attitude towards gay marriage and all of that stuff shifted. Now people proclaiming themselves as gay had the liberty to marry each other. And that liberty that was granted to them, that freedom that was granted to them, created rights. Rights to favorable taxation benefits, rights to receive retirement benefits of the dead spouse, rights to whatever it might be. All kinds of rights getting created by that. And where this has gone even further was the trans movement, which we'll see in a bit. But the idea here is to see this modern idea of freedom, which is to choose your partner regardless of same-sex or different sex. That freedom, quote unquote, has rippled all the way through to the Supreme Court and then the attitudes from the Supreme Court and how it's being interpreted. So that's modern view of liberty, not what we read in 1 Peter. All right, so let's go to the problem with religion. Now, 153. Oops, there I am. Doma 153. Got it. Okay. So we just went through the problem with religion. Sorry I didn't announce that. The idea of religion is this. The religion is a binder on your freedom. Because religion says God says this. And frankly, Buddha says this. Or Muhammad says this. Or whatever. So this idea of a religious context is a binder on your freedom, your ability to choose. Now what is happening here is there's a conflict between your freedom and your happiness. So freedom in this context, this old context, is your freedom was used for the purposes of furthering something far bigger than yourselves. For a Christian, we know that freedom is meant to further the kingdom of God. And that's the whole Bible teaching. But even, a heretical system, like Muslim or whatever, you're supposed to sacrifice for the greater good. You're supposed to sacrifice for Rome, whatever it is. That's supposed to be bigger than you. But now the shift towards modern liberty, that's the focus, because I must be happy. What's the way to be happy? I get whatever I want. I get whatever I want. So that's the end of the argument with religion, because that's a binder. Now we go to not tolerance but equity, starting on page 156. 156. Now remember, the tolerance idea is I don't agree with it, but I let it happen. That used to be okay, but it changed. It changed. David, do you have a book? Can you read for us? Perfect. 156, under not tolerance but equity. If you could read the first two paragraphs there, please.
Given the above, it should be clear that tolerance of LGBTQ plus identities has never going to be enough for the movement. To tolerate somebody is, by definition, to disapprove of them, albeit in a rather passive way. But it is also not to recognize them as we define recognition earlier. It is not to affirm their identities as they wish to be affirmed. At best, it is to keep them in place as second-class members of society. And this, in turn, helps to explain the reason why such as cake-baking have become so contentious. The Christian baker who refuses to produce a cake for a gay marriage celebration is doing so because her conscience would regard such an act as supporting a relationship she regards as fundamentally immoral. The gay couple, however, regard her refusal as denial of their fundamental and constitutionally protected identity. Equality requires equal recognition of a kind that tolerance simply does not provide.
Thank you, David. That's perfect. That last sentence is the key. The Supreme Court decision, equality requires equal recognition of a kind that tolerance does not provide. That's how things shifted. That's why the baker of the cake, and I can't remember what city that person was in, Colorado, that they were in years of lawsuits, facing jail, facing financial penalties, etc., for discrimination. What they were saying was, this is as if a black person came up to you and said, "Oh, I don't support black people, so I'm not going to bake a cake for you." Or a handicapped person came up and said, "Oh, I want a cake." And said, "No, I don't support handicapped people, so I'm not going to bake a cake for you," which we would say is wrong. But this choice now of partner has shifted into something that's supposed to be equivalent to that. That's where that's gone. So let's keep going with his analysis. Page 157, let's see. Dwayne, could I pick on you? Page 157, right in the middle, the paragraph starts, "And this is where religions, especially Christianity."
And this is where religions, especially religions such as Christianity and Judaism, that hold to strict codes with regard to sex and sexuality, will end up in trouble because they are going to find themselves in a world that operates with what we might call a different grammar and syntax of identity. For example, when the Christian objects to homosexuality, he may well think he is objecting to a set of sexual desires or sexual practices. But the gay man sees those desires as part of who he is in his very essence.
That's it right there. Perfect. Do you see the difference? That's all I needed to read. That's perfect. Thank you. We are speaking a different language. And this is, remember, Truman's purpose with this book, right? The book was not written as a polemic to disprove all this. We could do that. This book is not written as the 5 steps to evangelize, etc. We could do that. What this book is written to is to help us understand that dynamic right there. We're speaking words, but they're interpreting those words differently than the way that we are. So we think that we're talking to someone that is practicing, I even said it, who is practicing homosexuality. Because we see it as an action, as a sin against God. But they say, no, I'm a Christian. I'm a homosexual. I'm a transgender. It's who I am in my essence. Born this way, can't change it. It's going to be who I am, and I'm a transsexual in a long line of the transsexual fight that goes forever and will go on until whatever utopia we achieve, and I'm fighting it out, and this is my purpose and meaning in life. It's my happiness.
Is this where the conversation of the gay gene?
What's that?
Is this where the conversation of the gay gene?
He says, is this the conversation of the gay gene? Sorry, I spoke over you again.
No, that's okay. You said it.
The conversation of the gay gene. Yes, it is. Because if it's genetic, it would prove the point, is the argument. But what we have is the scriptures that says it's not genetic. Nathan.
The gay gene thing is an interesting factor because in that instance there's a level at which, like, well, on the one hand we're saying identity is chosen. I choose my identity. Whereas, like, I'm a man and I don't choose to be a man, if that makes sense. So, like, if there's a gay gene, then that person would not choose to be gay. So that would go backwards, actually, in this progressive idea, because the where they've gone to is that I actually choose what I want to be, and that is my identity, and therefore I live that out, and you can't impose your beliefs on me.
Right. So what Nathan's getting to, and I'll summarize, because this is why I've changed our little graph here, as you see. This whole grand citizenship of heaven, we recognized that say here's the Lund family way down here. There's our grand purpose, etc. But then the Lund family, I work for JLL, which is a couple 100-year-old firm, been around before I am. My duty as an employee of JLL is to work well for the clients, to further the growth of the overall platform, and to serve the larger real estate community. By the way, I'm a real estate appraiser. That's been around for a while. I'm a member of the Appraisal Institute, which is a couple 100 years old, and so I'm a good member. I've taught classes. I do do whatever, etc. And by the way, I'm a member of the United States of America, which has been around longer than I have, and we're an important country, and we've got this role in the world for now, as long as we're here. And by the way, etc. But do you see how they all fit? Now there's little points of disagreement, right? The United States, we've got things in the United States that we do not think comport with the Christian faith. However, we can still live in the United States and be part of it, etc. But when you get out here, right? And it's LGBT, that's one thing. So this is transcending the laws of God, but it's outside of the purview and kingdom of God, because it is by definition sin. So if this is your purpose and meaning, this is sin. Now, you add this. All of a sudden, this is eating that up. Lesbian, gay, bisexual affirms physical gender. It's the attraction and the act. Transgender, queer, destroys physical gender. So they can't comport with each other because either this group is right or that group is right. If that group is right, these guys don't exist. If this group is right, these guys don't exist. So it's cannibalistic. And it can't fit in here where things do fit. And there's more. Feminism destroys masculinism, whatever you'd want to call that. Ultimately, it's a domination, it's a superiority. The climate change movement fights against humanity as a species. We are the corruption. We are the ones that destroy the earth. The earth is better without us in its natural state. A little bit of Rousseau in there. So there's all kinds of things that are outside. Now, can you be for women's rights inside of God? Yes, you can. Because women have been mistreated, and women are being mistreated all over the country, all over the world. Can you be for the environment? Yes, you can be a conservationist, a steward of the environment. You do not want factories dumping sewage and sludge and whatnot into our rivers and killing everything that's below the factory. And Christians are good about that, and should be. So you can be outside and inside. But if you're inside, then it's within the scope of God's law and purposes, and it's underneath God. God is first. Everything you check to God. Well, what's that policy? Is that okay? Yeah, that's okay. Okay, so I'm good. That's the difference. Now, this also is what we would call biblical tolerance. Biblical tolerance. Because, you know, you're over here in this thing doing that, and I'm over here in this thing doing that. Do I understand what you're doing? No, not really. I'll give you a benefit of a doubt, or maybe we disagree some policies, whatever, but you're trying to get to the same place I am. It's all good. We can live with each other. United States, same way. Oh, we've got different religions in the United States. This is the way that we frame it. But we're not going to mandate a religion. We give you the freedom to practice religion, but your religion can't eat my religion can't eat your religion. We had that. We've seen it in London, Bloody Mary and her sister. We've seen that. So that's old form tolerance, but it's fitting under the rubric of God himself, recognizing that we all as sinners, as imperfect people with imperfect understanding, must give room and grace. And that's a right use of liberty. So, in his chapter, not tolerance, but equality, that gets changed. That gets changed. All right, let's keep going to Thomas Jefferson, page 158. Matt, could I ask you to read for us? Can someone hand him a book? Perfect. Stand up, read 158 right at the top. In his notes on the state of Virginia, Thomas Jefferson.
In his notes on the state of Virginia, Thomas Jefferson comments that it does be no injury for my neighbor to say there are many gods or no God. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. For Jefferson, this was why freedom of religion was not a complicated matter. The personal religious beliefs of others did not damage him financially or harm him physically. In terms of the argument of this book, we might infer, therefore, that Jefferson was living in a world where selfhood was not so psychologically constructed, but tied far more closely to the physical, to the individual's body and property. But that does not apply today. In a world where inner psychology dominates how we think of ourselves, then feelings too become very important in how we conceptualize harm. In that world, the personal religious beliefs of the neighbors are of concern because disagreement implies that at least one of us is wrong. And today, that constitutes a form of oppression. Pockets may not be picked and legs may not be broken by religious conservatives, but feelings are hurt and identities are therefore marginalized, oppressed, and denied legitimacy.
Thank you. And that's that Supreme Court wording. You've been stigmatized. You've been marginalized. So therefore, you have legal redress. That's where that's gone. All right, so that's liberty. Now the problem then becomes free speech, and he goes right on to this larger category. So 158, let's see. Owen, can I pick on you? Where's Owen? There he is. Go ahead and stand up nice and loud. 158, the problem with free speech, it should be clear from above. Go ahead.
It should be clear from the above that pressing against religious freedom is not restricted to religion. Indeed, the challenge to religious freedom is simply the specific instance of a much broader challenge to traditional freedom of speech. Religious speech is problematic precisely because words in general have come to take on new significance in the now here has the challenge emerged more unexpectedly, and with more drama than on college campuses. The very places where freedom of speech and injury would seem so basic to the educational past.
Perfect. And just pass that along to your brother. You're next. We're going to go through the whole line of it. Go ahead. Nope, we're going to take you over to page 159 right in the middle. When violence moves from the physical and financial to the psychological. And this is the key shift. What we're trying to legislate now and why this is so difficult is now we're trying to create regulation and law and consequence for psychological harm and understanding. For decisions people are making in their head and declarations they're making in their head about their life. A man that's married to a woman for 20 years and then comes out gay. And so everything changes. That's the shift. Go ahead.
The balance moves from the physical, the financial, the psychological. However, everything changes. Once oppression is seen to exist in its most insidious form at the level of psychology, at that point where culture shapes the individual ideas and intuitions, then a different notion of political freedom inevitably emerges. While many traditional conservatives and liberals are shocked at the current push against freedom of speech, it makes sense given the broader changes in society's notion of self.
Keep going.
A theoretical harbinger of this was set forth by the new left philosopher Herbert Marcuse in the controversial 1965 essay, Repressive Tolerance. Marcuse, a member of the Frankfurt School, was a Marxist thinker who had drawn heavily on the thought of Sigmund Freud in order to formulate his political philosophy. Adam Reich, see chapter 4.
So pause there. Did you catch all the names? Follows Marxism, heavily influenced by Sigmund Freud, and a follower of William Reich. There's all of our old friends right there. And so he's written this pamphlet, Repressive Tolerance, which should go together, those two words, but repressive tolerance. Keep going.
Marcus was concerned with why people did not develop a revolutionary self-conscious, but were often gold in accepting the status quo. In Impulsive Tolerance, Marcus presents the traditional liberal concept of freedom of speech as a confidence trick that gives the impression that true freedom exists.
So pause there. Do you remember what was Marx? He would say that religion is the opiate of the masses. And the effect of the opiate, and it wasn't just to make people dumb or anything like that, what he was saying is that the masses, if they would wake up to the current situation they're in, meaning you're the proletariat, and you're being dominated by this overlord's master's class, you'd revolt, you would revolution. That was the answer in Marx's philosophy. But it was religion. It was religion that was opiating, that was drugging the masses so that they would stay docile underneath this horrible system they were in. Now, Marcuse has a different definition of what this new opiate is. Go ahead.
The ruling class officially allows freedom of speech and expression while quietly imposing severe limits on the freedom. For example, he notes that in a Western democracy, one can advocate Marxism as the set of ideas, but if one moves toward enacting such, inevitably by being disruptive and violently challenge the status quo, then one would find such freedom rapidly curtailed by the dominant political powers. Freedom of speech as a broad, unqualified principle is thus, for Marcuse, something akin to the old bread and circuses of the Roman Empire. It is a way of distracting people from seeing the real injustices of the world in which they live.
Perfect. Thank you. So do you see what he's saying? The thing that keeps people from revolution is freedom of speech. Because they're allowed to talk about whatever they want to talk about. But you try to become a communist and you try to change the government, you try to do things like that, and you're going to get crushed. So freedom of speech is a myth. It's an opiate. It's designed to be like the little steam valve on top of the old kettle pots that just lets the pressure out of the pot. But it's not real. So that's the new opiate, according to Marcuse. But what does that do to the concept of freedom of speech? What's that? Kills it how?
Well, today we classify some things as hate speech. And we're redefining what liberty is by what we can say and not say. Our brothers in the ARP churches in Canada, if they preach on 1 Corinthians, whatever it is, about gays and homosexuals, they could be arrested. Right now they're having the freedom of not being accused, but it's there.
Yeah.
And so by classifying something said against a class of people, that becomes hate speech, which becomes a crime, which means you can be arrested and jailed.
That's right. So freedom of speech then is no longer a principle that we believe in. It's actually a harm to society because it's nothing more than an opiate in Marcuse's mind to keep society down, to keep society from revolution. Yes?
I was just going to say that if freedom of speech does not exist as an actual freedom, it is an oppressive tool used by the ruling class, then it is something to destroy. It is not something to uphold because it never existed in the first place.
Yes, exactly right. So Spencer, since Aiden has already read, I would have made him read after that speech because that's where we're going. You're next. Go ahead. This is perfect. Teed it up beautifully. 161, the first paragraph, what Marcuse is calling for here is the censoring of speech.
What Marcuse is calling for here is the censoring of speech as a means of moving society toward a more just and equitable state. To allow speech that presents the injustices of the status quo, economic, sexual, racial, etc., as legitimate or even natural, is to offer support to those injustices. It therefore behooves the left, of which Marcuse is, of the spokesperson, to work toward closing down the avenues and opportunities for such speech. We should note that this goes well beyond the use of
pejorative epithets.
Most people acknowledge that the use of certain words, such as racial epithets, is wrong, even if they might still defend the freedom of the people to use such. A Marcusean perspective does not simply call for the outlawing of particular insulting words and phrases. It is also a call for the much more thorough policing of speech, one that includes philosophies and worldviews as well. Indeed, we might rephrase Marcuse by saying that he wants narratives that run contrary to his vision of society to be outlawed on the grounds that they present a false view of reality and serve to dehumanize people.
Perfect. Thank you. So do you see the shift here? Freedom of speech, which was in our founding documents and has been a principle of good governments for thousands of years in different ways. It's always had moderations. You only had so much freedom when there was a king to speak, right? And you only have so much freedom ever, but largely as a principle. What Marcuse is doing here now is he's saying, look, freedom of speech, nothing more than a harm to society. Because if society feels like freely, and then they can, but they're not allowed to do anything about it, then it's a falseness. It's a net negative. So then what he's doing is he's saying, look, we've got to outlaw this idea of free speech. And so what do we need to then outlaw? And he says, Marcuse, any narratives that run contrary to his vision of society must be outlawed on the grounds that they present a false view of reality and dehumanize people. Dehumanize in the sense that people are missing the freedom that they should have, the liberty they should have, and because they're missing the liberty they should have, they're missing the fulfillment or happiness that's guaranteed them. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So it all flows together in this terrible way, but at the end of the day, it's cannibalistic. And we've seen that because all of these other things out here don't fit and they must destroy each other. So Nate, we're going to finish with you. We're not going to get all the way through our outline, but let's go ahead and finish with you. Okay.
There isn't any back.
Wow. I think Tim is the only book holder on the right-hand side. Oh, no, we've got one here, too. Yes.
The problem with Marcuse is that he gives us who's supposed to enforce these laws.
And who comes up with the worldview in the first place?
Right, so
Yeah.
it's, as you said, because there's no telos. There's nothing above it. It's completely in itself. And so without a telos, there's no way in which you can properly enforce and restrict freedom of speech.
Absolutely.
Some level of power to act. It's called Antifa.
Well, and even that, so Antifa's worldview is different than LGBT, is different than whatever, and so everybody would end up fighting over which worldview to promulgate, which is what we're feeling in the U.S. or westernized countries. And as we try to do this, we balance, we get worse and worse. Let's go ahead and this is an amazing example. Bottom of 161, to bring this into the language of the present day. Go ahead and just keep reading.
To bring this into the language of the present day, there are those who offer narratives that reinforce attitudes and systems which are considered by those on the left unjust. Such people need to be silenced and their narratives censored and censored. Therefore, if someone is seen to be speaking in a way that perpetuates the normative status of heterosexual white males and thereby explicitly or implicitly marginalizing others, LGBT+, people, women, ethnic minorities, etc., such speech is to be suppressed by any means necessary. This is why we now see battles over speech codes on campus, in the workplace, and even in the public square. Given the narrative of the psychological self, this all makes perfect sense.
And just listen to that. This all makes perfect sense, meaning it flows. When you come at it from other ways, like what Nathan was doing earlier, wait a minute, there's no end point. Wait a minute, this disagrees with that. Then it doesn't make sense. You have to stay narrowly within it, but then it flows, and you can see why. But go ahead.
If human happiness is constituted by an inner sense of well-being, then anything that disrupts that is problematic. The implications of this are dramatic and set to be comprehensive, or at least to involve all areas of the public square.
Perfect. So I'm going to cut to the chase here. There was a speaker that was invited to a college campus, Charles Murray. He was invited to Middlebury College, 2017. The protests were so violent that they had to cart him out of there and all of this stuff. But then this is the culmination. Listen to this letter by this group to the college and to the newspapers. This is bottom of 163. We feel as though individually our voices are often ignored in the face of hegemonic Middlebury discourse. But collectively, we will be able to engage with Middlebury community more effectively. We are a radical, anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-classicist, anti-ableist, and anti-homophobic, as well as strongly opposed to all forms of oppression group that rejects the structurally conservative, liberal, in quotation marks, meaning life, liberty, pursuit of happiness as traditionally taught. We reject that liberal paradigm that exists at Middlebury. The reasons behind our formation are many, but the predominant one is a feeling of alienation, there's that word, within the campus dialogue. The so-called free market of ideas on campus is an illusion, one which exists only to support one strong ideology, meaning the wrong ideology. There's the culmination. You're against absolutely everything except for, and then your group forms based on the basis of that you're against absolutely everything. and that's all you have left. But guess what? You're a part of a long line of people that have been against absolutely everything, and now you're in your season of time when you're against absolutely everything, and here's the place that you hold at Middlebury College is against absolutely everything, and this is important for your children, blah, blah, blah. Do you see how this works? Again and again and again. So let's flip to the blessed conclusion. And for the next couple weeks, we get to talk about what does the church do. But I'll read this last paragraph. It's 167. All of this obviously has serious implications for the church, for Orthodox Christians, and for religiously and culturally conservative and traditional people in general. The world where freedom of religion, let alone freedom of speech, is now regarded by many, as a problem for a free society, rather than a basic foundation of the same, is indeed a strange new world. But, strange and new as it is also our world, the one to which we are called to respond. What's such a response might look like, or in what way it might consist, is the subject of the next and final chapter. And that chapter is Strangers in the Strange New World. So next week we'll begin on chapter 9. Probably do that for a couple of weeks. Brad.